The cattle were dying, and Jack Morrison knew that if he lost any more head, he would lose the ranch his father had built with calloused hands and broken dreams. The summer of 1882 had scorched the Texas plains until the grass turned brittle as old bones, and the herd had grown so restless that 3 cowboys had already quit rather than face another sleepless night chasing spooked steers across the dark prairie. Jack stood at the edge of his property, watching 200 head of longhorn cattle pace and bellow in their pen, their eyes rolling white with an anxiety that seemed to feed on itself. They had not settled properly in 5 days, and the weight was falling off them faster than he could afford. His foreman, Pete Garrett, a gray-haired man who had worked cattle for 40 years, shook his head as he approached. "Boss, I have never seen anything like this," Pete said, removing his hat to wipe the sweat from his brow. "It is like they have forgotten how to rest. We have tried everything. Different feed, different water, moving them to the north pasture. Nothing works." Jack felt the familiar knot of worry tighten in his chest. He was 26 years old, and he had inherited this ranch 3 years ago when his father died of pneumonia. Every dollar he had was tied up in this herd, and he had a loan coming due at the bank in Abilene in 2 months. Without healthy cattle to drive north and sell, he would lose everything. "Keep trying," Jack said, though he heard the defeat in his own voice. "There has to be something." That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jack rode into the small town of Sweetwater, 6 miles from his ranch. He needed supplies, but more than that, he needed to escape the constant noise of his agitated herd. The sound of their lowing had begun to invade his sleep, turning his dreams into anxious tangles of worry and arithmetic. Sweetwater was not much of a town, just a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of other buildings that served the ranchers and farmers scattered across the surrounding territory. Jack tied his horse outside the general store and walked inside, nodding to Mrs. Henderson, who ran the place with her husband. "Afternoon, Jack," she said, her round face creasing into a sympathetic smile. "I heard about your troubles with the herd." News traveled fast in small towns. Jack managed a thin smile. "Yes, ma'am, I am hoping it passes soon." "You should talk to that new girl who came to town last week," Mrs. Henderson said, leaning across the counter conspiratorially. "She is staying at the boarding house. Name is Catherine Wellesley. She came from back east, Philadelphia, I think, and she has been helping out at the church. Pretty little thing, but there is something special about her." Jack was not particularly interested in meeting a woman from the East. In his experience, Eastern ladies found ranch life either quaint or appalling, and neither attitude was particularly helpful. But Mrs. Henderson was watching him with an expectant expression, so he nodded politely. "What makes her special?" he asked, more out of courtesy than curiosity. "Her voice," Mrs. Henderson said simply. "You should hear her sing. Last Sunday at church, I swear every person in that building felt like they were sitting in the presence of angels. Even old Tom Crawford stayed awake for the whole service, and you know he usually starts snoring before the first hymn ends." Jack collected his supplies and thanked Mrs. Henderson, but he forgot about Catherine Wellesley as soon as he stepped outside. He had more pressing concerns than a woman with a pretty voice, but fate, as it often does, had different plans. 2 days later, Jack was riding the fence line on the eastern edge of his property when he heard something that made him pull his horse to a sudden stop. It was a voice, a woman's voice, singing a melody he did not recognize. The song drifted across the prairie like cool water, clear and pure and impossibly beautiful. Jack sat in his saddle, transfixed, as the voice rose and fell, carrying words he could not quite make out but felt deep in his chest. He urged his horse forward, following the sound, and crested a small hill to see a woman standing in the shade of a cottonwood tree near the creek that marked the boundary of his land. She wore a simple blue dress that had seen better days, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun. She was not looking in his direction. Her eyes were closed as she sang, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. Jack dismounted quietly and stood holding his horse's reins, not wanting to interrupt. The song was unlike anything he had heard before, not quite a hymn but not a folk song either. It was something in between, something that seemed to speak directly to the tired, worried part of his soul. When she finished, the silence that followed felt almost sacred. "That was beautiful," Jack said, and immediately felt foolish for stating something so obvious. The woman's eyes flew open and she startled, taking a step back. Up close, Jack could see that she was young, probably around his own age, with dark eyes and a face that was more interesting than conventionally pretty. There was an intelligence in her gaze and a wariness that suggested she had learned to be careful around strangers. "I apologize," she said quickly. "I did not realize this was private property. I will leave." "No, please," Jack said, raising a hand. "You are not trespassing. The creek is the boundary line and you are on the public side. I am Jack Morrison. I own the ranch just over that hill." She relaxed slightly. "Catherine Wellesley. I arrived in Sweetwater last week." "Yes, Mrs. Henderson mentioned you," Jack said, then felt awkward, as though he had been gossiping. "She said you helped out at the church." Catherine smiled, and it transformed her face entirely. "Mrs. Henderson is very kind. I needed work, and Reverend Thomas was generous enough to let me assist with the music and teach some of the children their letters." Jack found himself wanting to keep her talking, just to hear her voice again, even in regular speech. There was a musicality to it, a gentle cadence that felt soothing after days of listening to cattle bellow and cowboys curse. "Where did you learn to sing like that?" he asked. A shadow passed across her face. "My mother taught me. She was a singer before she married my father. She performed in concert halls in New York and Philadelphia." The past tense and the sadness in her voice told Jack not to press further on that subject. Instead, he said, "What brings you to Sweetwater? It is a long way from Philadelphia." Catherine looked away, toward the western horizon where the sun was beginning its descent. "I needed a fresh start. Sometimes staying in a place holds you back from becoming who you are meant to be." It was a careful answer, the kind that revealed nothing while seeming to reveal something. Jack recognized it because he had given similar answers himself when people asked how he was managing without his father. But he did not push. Everyone had their secrets, especially people who traveled halfway across the country to start over. "Well, we are glad to have you in Sweetwater," Jack said, meaning it. "If you ever need anything, my ranch is just over that hill, the Morrison Ranch." "Thank you," Catherine said, and he saw genuine warmth in her eyes. "That is very kind." They talked for a few more minutes, careful conversation about the weather and the town, before Catherine said she needed to return before dark. Jack watched her walk away, following the creek path back toward town, and realized that for the first time in days, the knot of anxiety in his chest had loosened. That night, the cattle were no better. If anything, they seemed worse, their restlessness spreading like a contagion through the herd. Jack stood by the pen, watching them mill about in the moonlight, and felt desperation creeping in. He had tried everything he could think of. Pete had tried everything he could think of. The cattle should have been settled and calm, gaining weight for the drive north, but instead they were wearing themselves down to nothing. On impulse, Jack saddled his horse and rode into town. It was late, well past 9 o'clock, and most of Sweetwater was dark and quiet. He found the boarding house and knocked softly, hoping he was not making a terrible mistake. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, answered the door in her nightgown and robe, looking alarmed. "Mr. Morrison, is something wrong?" "I need to speak with Miss Wellesley," Jack said. "I know it is late and I apologize, but it is important." Mrs. Patterson looked skeptical, but she called up the stairs, and a few minutes later Catherine appeared, wrapped in a shawl, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked concerned. "Mr. Morrison, what has happened?" Jack suddenly felt ridiculous. He was a grown man, a ranch owner, and here he was showing up at a woman's door after dark with a wild idea based on nothing but instinct. But he had come this far, so he pressed on. "My cattle," he said. "They have been restless for nearly a week." They will not settle or sleep properly and they are losing weight. I have tried everything, but nothing works. And then today, when I heard you singing, I felt calm for the first time in days. I know this sounds crazy, but I was wondering if you would be willing to come to my ranch and try singing to them." Catherine stared at him as though he had lost his mind. Mrs. Patterson made a disapproving sound in her throat. "You want me to sing to your cattle?" Catherine said slowly. "Yes," Jack said, committed now. "I will pay you, of course, and it would be completely proper. My foreman and the other hands would be there. I just think that maybe your voice could calm them the way it calmed me." There was a long silence. Catherine glanced at Mrs. Patterson, who shook her head firmly. But then Catherine looked back at Jack, and he saw something shift in her expression, some spark of curiosity or perhaps just pity for a desperate man. "All right," she said. "I will try, but if this does not work, you cannot blame me." "I promise," Jack said, relief flooding through him. "Thank you." They arranged for Jack to collect her the next evening after she finished her work at the church. Mrs. Patterson made it very clear that Catherine had better be returned safely and at a reasonable hour, and Jack assured her that she would be. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Jack could not focus on any of his regular work, and Pete noticed his distraction. "You are acting strange, boss," Pete said. "Something on your mind besides the cattle?" "I am trying something tonight," Jack said. "Something different." "Well, it better work," Pete said grimly. "We lost another steer this morning, just keeled over from exhaustion." That evening, Jack rode into town wearing his cleanest shirt and with his hair combed back. He collected Catherine from the boarding house, ignoring Mrs. Patterson's disapproving stare, and helped her up onto his horse. She sat side saddle in front of him, and he tried not to notice how pleasant it was to have her close, the faint scent of lavender soap in her hair. As they rode toward the ranch, Catherine said, "I want you to know that I have never done anything like this before. I do not know if it will work." "I appreciate you being willing to try," Jack said. "That is more than most people would do." When they arrived at the ranch, Pete and the other hands were gathered near the cattle pen, clearly curious about what their boss was up to. Jack helped Catherine down from the horse and led her to a spot near the pen where she could see the cattle and they could see her. "Just sing whatever feels right," Jack said quietly. "There is no wrong way to do this." Catherine looked nervous, but she nodded. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and then she began to sing. The song that emerged from her throat was unlike anything Jack had heard before, even more beautiful than the melody she had been singing by the creek. It was slow and gentle, with a rhythm like a heartbeat or the rocking of a cradle. The words were in English, but they had a lullaby quality, speaking of rest and peace and safety. Her voice carried across the pen, clear and strong, and Jack watched in amazement as the cattle began to respond. At first, it was subtle. A few of the steers stopped pacing and turned their heads toward Catherine. Then more followed, their ears pricking forward. The constant bellowing that had plagued the herd for days began to quiet. Catherine kept singing, one song flowing into another, and the transformation continued. The cattle began to settle, lowering themselves to the ground, their eyes growing heavy. Jack looked around and saw that the other cowboys were staring, transfixed. Pete's mouth was hanging open. Even the horses seemed calmer, standing with their heads lowered, ears relaxed. Catherine sang for nearly an hour, her voice never wavering, never losing its pure, clear quality. By the time she finished, the entire herd was lying down, quiet and peaceful. Some of the steers appeared to be sleeping, their sides rising and falling in steady, relaxed breaths. The change was so complete, so absolute, that Jack felt a lump forming in his throat. When Catherine opened her eyes and looked at him, he saw that she was smiling, her own eyes bright with wonder. "It worked," she whispered. "It worked," Jack repeated, hardly daring to believe it. Pete came up to them, shaking his head. "In 40 years of working cattle, I have never seen anything like that. Miss Wellesley, you have a gift from God himself." Catherine blushed at the praise. "I am just glad I could help." Jack wanted to say so much more, to tell her that she had not just helped, she had saved him, saved his ranch, saved everything his father had worked for. But the words felt too big for the moment, so instead he just said, "Thank you. Truly, thank you." As he rode Catherine back to town, Jack's mind was racing. The cattle had settled, but would they stay settled? And if they needed Catherine's singing regularly, how could he arrange that? He could not ask her to ride out to his ranch every evening, could he? It would not be proper, and she had her own work to do. "What are you thinking about so hard?" Catherine asked, and he realized he had been silent for too long. "I am thinking about what happens tomorrow night," Jack admitted, "if they get restless again." Catherine was quiet for a moment, then said, "I could come again tomorrow if you need me to, and perhaps for a few more nights after that, until they are settled into a routine. Mrs. Patterson will not like it, but I can handle her." "I would pay you for your time," Jack said quickly. "Whatever is fair." "We can discuss that later," Catherine said. "Right now I am just happy that it worked." When they reached the boarding house, Jack helped Catherine down from the horse and walked her to the door. In the light from the porch lantern, he could see the tiredness in her face, but also a glow of satisfaction. "Will you tell me something?" Jack asked, surprising himself with his boldness. "Why did you really leave Philadelphia?" Catherine looked at him for a long moment, as though weighing whether to trust him. Finally, she said, "I was engaged to be married, to a man my father chose. He was wealthy and respectable, and I was expected to be grateful for the match. But he was also cruel in small ways that other people did not see. He wanted to control everything about me, including my singing. He said it was not appropriate for his wife to perform in public. I realized that if I married him, I would lose the only part of myself that felt truly mine. So I broke the engagement and left." Jack felt a surge of anger toward a man he had never met. "He was a fool," Catherine smiled. "Thank you for saying that. Good night, Mr. Morrison." "Jack," he said. "Please call me Jack." "Good night, Jack," she said, and went inside. Jack rode back to the ranch feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The cattle were still settled when he arrived, lying peacefully in their pen. Pete was sitting by the fire, smoking his pipe. "That woman is a miracle, boss," Pete said. "You better hold on to her." Jack laughed, but he felt his face heating. "It is not like that, Pete." "Sure it is not," Pete said knowingly. "I saw the way you were looking at her." Jack did not dignify that with a response. But as he lay in his bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he could not help replaying the evening in his mind. Catherine's voice, the way she had looked when she smiled, the trust she had shown him by telling him about her past. He was in dangerous territory, he knew. He had no business developing feelings for a woman he had just met, especially when she had just escaped from one bad situation. But his heart, it seemed, had not gotten that message. Catherine came back the next night and the night after that. Each time she sang to the cattle, and each time they settled peacefully. By the fourth night, Jack could see that the herd had begun to regain their condition, eating well and resting properly. The crisis was passing, but Jack found reasons for Catherine to keep coming. He told himself it was to maintain the cattle's good behavior, to establish a firm routine. In truth, he simply could not bear the thought of not seeing her each evening. They had fallen into a pattern where he would ride into town, collect her, bring her to the ranch, and then afterward they would talk for a while before he took her home. Those conversations had become the highlight of Jack's days. He learned that Catherine's mother had died when she was 16, and that her father had remarried quickly to a woman who saw Catherine as a burden. He learned that she loved books, especially poetry, and that she had taught herself to play the piano by sneaking into the parlor of her father's house when no one was home. He learned that she had always dreamed of going west, of seeing open spaces and feeling truly free. In turn, Jack told her about his father, about the pressure of living up to a legacy, about the fear that he was not good enough to hold on to what his father had built. He told her about his mother, who had died giving birth to him, and the guilt he sometimes felt about that even though he knew it was irrational. He told her things he had never told anyone else, and she listened with a kind of attention that made him feel truly seen. On the 8th night, as Jack was riding Catherine back to town, she said, "I think the cattle are settled now. They probably do not need me anymore." Jack's heart sank. "Are you sure? I think a few more nights would be good, just to be certain." Catherine smiled, and in the moonlight her face was luminous. "Jack, I think we both know the cattle are fine. The question is whether you want me to keep coming for some other reason." Jack pulled the horse to a stop. They were halfway between the ranch and town, surrounded by open prairie and starlight. He turned in the saddle to look at Catherine and found her watching him with an expression that was both nervous and hopeful. "I do," he said honestly. "I want you to keep coming. Not for the cattle, but because I look forward to seeing you every day, because when I am with you, everything feels better, easier, like maybe I can actually manage all of this." Catherine's smile widened. "I was hoping you would say that, because I look forward to seeing you too." "More than is probably wise for someone who just escaped an engagement." "We can take it slow," Jack said. "There is no rush, I just want to spend time with you." "I would like that," Catherine said softly. Jack felt like his heart might burst from his chest. He wanted to kiss her, but it felt too soon, too presumptuous. Instead, he took her hand and squeezed it gently, and she squeezed back. From that night on, Catherine came to the ranch not to sing to the cattle, though she still did that occasionally, but simply to be with Jack. They would sit on the porch of his ranch house and watch the sunset, or they would walk down to the creek where they had first met and talk for hours. Jack found himself falling harder and harder for her with each passing day. The other hands noticed, of course. Pete teased Jack mercilessly, but in a good-natured way. "Never thought I would see the day when the boss was mooning over a woman like a lovesick calf," Pete said one morning, "but I am glad for it. You have been alone too long." Jack did not even bother denying it. He was mooning over Catherine, and he was not ashamed to admit it. 2 months after they met, Jack took Catherine on a picnic to a spot on his property where wildflowers grew in thick carpets of purple and yellow. They sat on a blanket and ate sandwiches and pie that Jack had awkwardly prepared himself, making Catherine laugh at his description of his struggles in the kitchen. "You are a rancher, not a cook," she said fondly. "That is what matters." "I can learn to cook," Jack said, "if I had a reason to." Catherine looked at him, her expression turning serious. "What kind of reason would you need?" Jack took a deep breath. This was it, the moment he had been both anticipating and dreading. The kind of reason where I would need to feed more than just myself. Where I would have someone else to take care of. "Jack," Catherine said softly. "I love you," Jack said, the words tumbling out. "I know it has only been 2 months, and I know you just left an engagement, and maybe it is too soon. But I love you, Catherine. I love your voice and your kindness and the way you listen. I love how brave you were to leave everything you knew and start over. I love the way you look at the world, like you see beauty everywhere. I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will have you. I love you too, Jack. I think I have loved you since that first night when you showed up at the boarding house with that wild idea about singing to your cattle. You were so earnest and so desperate, and I thought, here is a man who is willing to try anything, who is willing to take a chance, and that is exactly what I needed." Jack kissed her then, soft and sweet, and it felt like coming home. When they pulled apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "So when should we get married?" Catherine asked, practical even in the midst of joy. "As soon as possible," Jack said. "Tomorrow, if the Reverend will do it," Catherine laughed. "How about 2 weeks? That will give me time to make a dress and you time to fix up the ranch house a bit." "It is a bit sparse for a married couple." 2 weeks, Jack agreed, but not a day longer. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Jack cleaned and repaired the ranch house, fixing loose boards and whitewashing walls. Pete and the other hands pitched in, clearly delighted at the prospect of having a woman around to civilize their rough-edged boss. Catherine worked with Mrs. Henderson and some of the other town ladies to make a simple but beautiful wedding dress and prepare food for a celebration. The wedding took place on a perfect September afternoon in the little church in Sweetwater. The whole town turned out, curious to see the Eastern woman marry the local rancher in what had become the most talked-about courtship in recent memory. Catherine wore a cream-colored dress with lace at the collar and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Jack had picked that morning. Jack wore his best suit, the one he usually saved for trips to the bank, and tried not to fidget as he waited at the altar. When Catherine walked down the aisle, Jack forgot how to breathe. She was radiant, her face glowing with happiness, and when she reached him and took his hand, he felt like the luckiest man alive. Reverend Thomas kept the ceremony short and sweet. They exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their days, and when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. Jack kissed his bride and Catherine kissed him back, and for a moment, the whole world narrowed down to just the two of them. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns strung between the trees. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Catherine sang, of course, and her voice brought tears to more than one eye. Jack danced with his new wife, holding her close, and thought that he had never been happier. As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, Pete came up to Jack and clapped him on the shoulder. "You did good, boss. She is a fine woman." "I know," Jack said, watching Catherine bid goodbye to Mrs. Henderson. "I still cannot believe she said yes." "Believe it," Pete said, "and treat her right. A woman like that is rare." "I will," Jack promised. "I will spend the rest of my life treating her right." When everyone had gone and they were alone, Jack carried Catherine over the threshold of the ranch house, making her laugh and protest that it was not necessary. He set her down gently in the parlor, which he had filled with candles and more wildflowers. "It is beautiful," Catherine said, her eyes shining. "You did all this for me." "For us," Jack corrected. "This is our home now." They sat together on the old sofa that had been his father's, Catherine's head resting on Jack's shoulder. Outside, the cattle were quiet and peaceful. Inside, everything felt right. "Jack," Catherine said softly, "thank you for taking a chance on me. For seeing past where I came from and what I was running from." "Thank you for taking a chance on me," Jack replied, "for agreeing to live out here in the middle of nowhere with a man who knows more about cows than conversation." Catherine laughed. "You are better at conversation than you think. And this is not the middle of nowhere. It is home." Their first months of marriage were not without challenges. Catherine had to adjust to ranch life, learning to cook on a wood stove and manage a household with limited resources. Jack had to learn how to share his space and his life with another person, to consider someone else's needs and wishes. But they faced each challenge together, with patience and humor and a growing love that deepened with each passing day. Catherine continued to sing, both at church and around the ranch. The hands claimed that the cattle still responded to her voice, settling more quickly in the evenings when she sang while helping Jack with chores. Whether that was true or just ranch legend in the making, Jack did not know. What he did know was that her voice still quieted the storms inside him, still brought him peace when the worries of running a ranch threatened to overwhelm him. One night in December, as they lay in bed with the winter wind howling outside, Catherine said, "Jack, I have something to tell you." Jack felt a flutter of nervousness. "What is it?" "I am pregnant," Catherine said, her voice a mixture of joy and trepidation. "We are going to have a baby." Jack sat up, lighting the lamp on the bedside table so he could see her face properly. "Truly, truly," Catherine said. "I am about 3 months along, I think. The baby should come in late May or early June." Jack let out a whoop of joy and pulled Catherine into his arms, kissing her face, her hair, anywhere he could reach. "We are going to have a baby. I am going to be a father. Are you happy?" Catherine asked, though she must have been able to see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Jack said. "I am thrilled, terrified, but thrilled." "Me too," Catherine admitted. "I have never done this before." "We will figure it out together," Jack said firmly, "just like we have figured out everything else." The winter passed slowly, with Jack fussing over Catherine constantly, making sure she was warm enough and rested enough and eating enough. Catherine bore his attentions with good humor, even when they bordered on excessive. She continued her work at the church and around the ranch, though Jack made sure she did not overdo it. As her pregnancy progressed, the women of Sweetwater rallied around Catherine, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and cribs. Mrs. Henderson appointed herself as Catherine's unofficial advisor, stopping by the ranch regularly to check on her and bring supplies. Catherine was touched by the kindness of these women who had been strangers just months ago. In May, as Catherine's due date approached, Jack became increasingly nervous. He had sent for a midwife from Abilene, a woman named Mrs. Cooper, who came highly recommended, and he had prepared a room in the ranch house for the birth. But he could not shake the memory of his own mother, dying as she brought him into the world. Catherine must have sensed his fear because one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she took his hand and said, "I am going to be fine, Jack. I am strong and Mrs. Cooper knows what she is doing. You do not need to worry." "I cannot help it," Jack said. "I could not bear to lose you." "You will not lose me," Catherine said firmly. "I have too much to live for, a husband I love, a baby on the way, and a whole life ahead of us. I am not going anywhere." Jack wanted to believe her, and he tried. But when Catherine went into labor on a warm June morning, all of his fears came rushing back. He paced outside the bedroom while Mrs. Cooper and Mrs. Henderson attended to Catherine, listening to the sounds of his wife in pain and feeling utterly helpless. Pete found him there hours later wearing a path in the floorboards. "Boss, you need to sit down. You are going to worry yourself sick." "I cannot," Jack said. "What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing is going to go wrong," Pete said with a confidence Jack wished he could feel. "Miss Catherine is a fighter. She will come through this just fine." The labor lasted into the evening, and Jack's nerves were stretched to the breaking point. And then, just as the sun was setting, he heard a new sound, the cry of a baby. Jack froze, hardly daring to hope. A moment later, Mrs. Cooper opened the bedroom door, her face wreathed in smiles. "Congratulations, Mr. Morrison. You have a son, and your wife is doing beautifully." Jack nearly collapsed with relief. He stumbled into the bedroom and found Catherine propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Jack, come meet your son." Jack approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the baby in Catherine's arms. He was tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were trying to focus on the world around him. Jack felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "He is perfect," Jack whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for this gift." "What should we name him?" Catherine asked. Jack thought for a moment. "What about Samuel? It was my father's middle name." "Samuel Morrison," Catherine said, testing it out. "I love it." "Hello, Samuel. Welcome to the world." Little Samuel proved to be a healthy, hearty baby with a good set of lungs. He kept his parents up at night with his crying, but neither Jack nor Catherine minded. They were too enchanted with their son, too grateful for the miracle of his existence. As Samuel grew, it became clear that he had inherited his mother's musical gifts. Catherine would sing to him, and even as an infant, he would quiet and listen with rapt attention. By the time he was a year old, he was trying to hum along with her, his little voice joining hers in a sweet, off-key harmony that made Jack's heart swell with love. The ranch prospered in the years that followed. The cattle herd grew, and Jack was able to pay off the loan from the bank and even expand his operations. He hired more hands and built a new barn. The Morrison Ranch became known as one of the most successful operations in the territory, and people attributed Jack's success to his skill and hard work. Jack knew better. His success was due in large part to Catherine, to the peace and stability she had brought into his life, to the way she had helped him become not just a better rancher but a better man. When Samuel was 3, Catherine became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and Jack was less terrified, though he still worried. In the spring of 1887, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after Catherine's mother. Rose was as different from Samuel as night from day. Where Samuel was serious and thoughtful, Rose was mischievous and bold. But she too loved music, and some of Jack's favorite memories were of Catherine sitting at the piano they had bought, playing and singing while both children joined in, their voices blending in imperfect but beautiful harmony. Life was not always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, years when the cattle prices dropped and money was tight. There were illnesses and accidents, moments of fear and grief. But through it all, Jack and Catherine faced everything together, their love a steady anchor in the storms of life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jack took Catherine back to the spot where they had first met, by the cottonwood tree near the creek. The children were with Pete back at the ranch, giving Jack and Catherine a rare afternoon alone. "Do you remember the first time I saw you here?" Jack asked, holding Catherine's hand as they stood in the shade of the tree. "Of course," Catherine said. "I was singing and you looked at me like I was some kind of strange creature." "I was mesmerized," Jack corrected. "I had never heard anything like your voice, I still have not." "Do you remember what I said about it once?" Catherine shook her head, curious. "I told Pete that your voice could quiet a thunderstorm," Jack said, "and I meant it. You have spent the last 10 years quieting the storms in my life, bringing peace to my restless heart. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I did not think that was possible." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too, Jack. You gave me a home when I was lost, a family when I was alone. You believed in me when no one else did. These have been the best years of my life." They kissed, long and sweet, and then Catherine started to sing, the same song she had been singing the day they met. Jack listened, holding her close, and thought about how one chance encounter had changed everything, how a desperate idea had led to love. How a woman's voice, beautiful and true, had not only calmed his cattle but had also calmed his soul. The years continued to pass, bringing more changes and more blessings. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, learning the business from Jack and showing a natural aptitude for handling cattle and managing land. Rose became a teacher in Sweetwater, using the education her mother had given her to help other children learn. Both children married and had families of their own, filling the Morrison Ranch with grandchildren who ran through the fields and chased chickens and begged their grandmother to sing to them. Catherine's hair turned gray and Jack's face became weathered and lined from years in the sun, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, becoming richer and more complex with each passing year. They had arguments, of course, moments of frustration and misunderstanding. But they always came back together, always found their way back to the love that had brought them together in the first place. On warm summer evenings, the whole family would gather at the ranch for dinners that lasted for hours, filled with laughter and stories and music. Catherine would sing, sometimes with her children and grandchildren joining in, and Jack would sit back and watch, marveling at the life they had built together. The cattle, grazing peacefully in the distance, seemed to quiet whenever Catherine sang, just as they had that first magical night. Whether it was truly her voice that calmed them or simply ranch legend that had taken on a life of its own, no one could say for certain. But everyone agreed that there was something special about Catherine Morrison, something that brought peace wherever she went. Jack often thought back to that desperate night when he had knocked on the boarding house door, asking a woman he barely knew to sing to his restless cattle. It had been a wild idea, born of desperation and instinct, but it had been the best decision he ever made. Catherine had not just saved his herd, she had saved him, pulling him out of loneliness and fear and into a life filled with love and purpose. As Jack entered his 60s, he began to slow down, turning more and more of the ranch operations over to Samuel. He and Catherine spent their days quietly, tending the garden, taking walks, and simply enjoying each other's company. They had earned their rest, having worked hard for decades to build not just a successful ranch but a strong family. One spring morning, when the wildflowers were blooming and the air was sweet with the scent of new growth, Jack and Catherine rode out to their special spot by the creek. They did this several times a year, returning to the place where their story had begun. They sat under the cottonwood tree, which had grown taller and fuller over the years, and watched the water flow past. "Do you ever regret leaving Philadelphia?" Jack asked, a question he had asked before but always liked hearing the answer to. "Not for a single moment," Catherine said firmly. "Everything I could have had there pales in comparison to what I found here. Love, family, purpose, freedom, I have no regrets, Jack, none at all." "Good," Jack said, relieved as always to hear it, "because I could not imagine my life without you." "You will never have to," Catherine said, squeezing his hand. "We have years yet, you and I, years to watch our grandchildren grow, to tend this land, to love each other. This story is not over yet," and it was not. Jack and Catherine continued to be a fixture in Sweetwater and on the Morrison Ranch for many more years. They celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, attended weddings and christenings, mourned losses and celebrated victories. They were the heart of their family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. When Jack turned 70, the whole town threw him a party to celebrate not just his birthday but his contributions to the community. He had been a fair employer, a generous neighbor, and a good friend to many. During the celebration, person after person stood up to share stories about Jack, about his kindness and his integrity and his love for his family. But it was Catherine who gave the final speech, standing up in front of the crowd with her hair now completely white but her voice still clear and strong. "I met Jack Morrison nearly 40 years ago," she said, "when I was lost and searching for a new beginning. He gave me that beginning and so much more. He gave me a home, a family, and a love that has sustained me through all the years since." People talk about Jack's success as a rancher, about his skill with cattle and land, but his greatest gift has always been his heart. The way he loves fiercely and completely, the way he stands by the people he cares about, the way he never gives up even when things seem impossible. I am proud to be his wife, and I thank God every day for that desperate night when he showed up at my door with a crazy idea about singing to cattle. The crowd laughed and applauded, and Jack felt tears pricking at his eyes. Catherine came to him and kissed him, and the applause grew louder. "I love you," Jack whispered. "I love you too," Catherine whispered back. "Always and forever." The years continued their steady march forward. Jack and Catherine watched Samuel's children grow and start families of their own, making them great-grandparents. Rose's students went on to become teachers and doctors and ranchers themselves, spreading her influence far beyond Sweetwater. The Morrison Ranch remained prosperous, a testament to the foundation Jack had built and the family values he and Catherine had instilled. As they entered their 70s, both Jack and Catherine's health began to decline in small ways. Jack's knees ached from decades of riding and ranch work. Catherine's voice, while still beautiful, had lost some of its power. But they adapted, finding new ways to enjoy their days and each other's company. They spent long afternoons on the porch of the ranch house, the same porch where they had courted 40 years earlier, watching the world go by. Sometimes they talked, reminiscing about the past or discussing the present. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, content just to be together. One evening, as the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, Catherine said, "Jack, do you remember that first night when I sang to the cattle?" "Of course," Jack said. "How could I forget? It was the night that changed everything." "I was so nervous," Catherine said, smiling at the memory. "I thought you were crazy, and I thought I was crazy for agreeing to try. But when I started singing and saw the cattle respond, I felt like maybe I had found my purpose. Like maybe this was why I had traveled all the way from Philadelphia to this little town in Texas." "Your purpose was bigger than calming my cattle," Jack said. "Your purpose was to bring beauty and peace into the world, to use your gift to help people, You have done that every day of your life. We have done it together, Catherine corrected gently. Everything we have accomplished, we have done as partners. That is what I am most proud of, Jack. Not the ranch or the children or any of it individually, but the life we built together. The team we made. Jack nodded, feeling the truth of her words deep in his bones. They had been a team in every sense of the word. They had supported each other through challenges, celebrated each other's victories, and never lost sight of what mattered most, their love for each other and their family. As the years advanced into their late 70s and then 80s, Jack and Catherine became the beloved matriarch and patriarch of not just their family, but the entire Sweetwater community. People sought their advice on everything from marriage to business to child rearing. They were living examples of what a strong partnership could achieve, proof that love could endure through decades and hardships. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the family threw them a massive celebration. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and friends filled the ranch, turning it into a festival of love and joy. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Catherine sang, her voice now thin with age but still capable of bringing tears to eyes and peace to hearts. Jack held her hand throughout the evening, grateful beyond words for every moment they had shared. Samuel gave a toast, standing up in front of the assembled crowd. My parents have shown me what it means to love someone truly and completely. They have taught me that success is not measured in dollars or acres, but in the strength of your relationships and the love in your home. Dad, Mom, thank you for everything you have given us. Thank you for building a foundation we can stand on. Thank you for showing us how to live. Jack and Catherine both had tears streaming down their faces as their children and grandchildren echoed Samuel's sentiments. They had not set out to be role models or examples. They had simply tried to live their lives with integrity and love, but somehow that had been enough. As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, Jack and Catherine found themselves alone on the porch once again. The stars were brilliant overhead, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. 50 years, Catherine said softly. It feels like both a lifetime and an instant. I would do it all again, Jack said. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it. Me too, Catherine agreed. Though perhaps next time we could skip the part where you show up at midnight asking me to sing to cattle. Jack laughed, the sound rich and warm. But where would be the fun in that? They sat together in the darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had weathered every storm. The cattle were quiet in the distance, resting peacefully as they always did. The ranch was still, the land at peace. And Jack thought, as he had thought so many times over the years, that Catherine's voice truly could quiet a thunderstorm. It had certainly quieted his. The final years of Jack and Catherine's life were gentle ones, filled with the love of their family and the satisfaction of a life well lived. They passed within a year of each other, Jack going first in his sleep at the age of 87, and Catherine following him a year later at 86. The funerals were attended by what seemed like half of Texas, people coming from all over to pay their respects to a couple who had touched so many lives. They were buried side by side in the Sweetwater Cemetery, under a cottonwood tree that reminded everyone of the spot where their love story had begun. Samuel took over the ranch completely, running it with the same integrity and care his father had shown. He made sure to maintain the traditions Jack and Catherine had established, including the annual family gatherings and the music that had always been such an important part of their lives. Rose continued teaching, eventually becoming the principal of the Sweetwater School, a position she held until her retirement. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren grew up hearing stories about Jack and Catherine, about the night a desperate rancher had asked an Eastern woman to sing to his restless cattle, and how that simple act had blossomed into a love story for the ages. The story became part of the Morrison family legend, told and retold at gatherings, embellished slightly with each telling but always maintaining its essential truth. that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the wildest ideas lead to the greatest blessings. Years after Jack and Catherine had passed, their great-great-granddaughter Emma, who had inherited Catherine's gift for singing, stood by the original cottonwood tree where Jack and Catherine had first met. She was doing research for a school project about family history, and she wanted to visit the place where it had all begun. As she stood there, imagining what it must have been like that day in 1882 when a young woman from Philadelphia had stood in this very spot singing, Emma felt a sense of connection to ancestors she had never met. She understood, in that moment, why her family placed so much importance on this story. It was not just about romance or cattle or even music. It was about courage, the courage to take chances, to trust strangers, to leave behind what was comfortable in search of something better. Emma began to sing, one of the songs her mother had taught her, one that had been passed down through generations of Morrison women. Her voice carried across the prairie, clear and pure, and for a moment she felt like she was connected to Catherine, separated by over a century but joined by this shared gift. And perhaps it was just the wind, or perhaps it was something more, but Emma could have sworn she heard another voice joining hers, older and fainter but unmistakably there, singing harmony. She smiled, feeling the presence of her ancestors, and continued singing until the sun began to set. Back at the Morrison Ranch, which was still in family hands and still prosperous, Emma's grandfather was telling his own grandchildren about Jack and Catherine, about how their love had built not just a ranch but a legacy. He told them about that first night when Catherine sang to the cattle, about how Jack had known immediately that she was special, about how they had spent 50 years together building a life and a family. The children listened with wide eyes, enchanted by the story as children always were. When their grandfather finished, the youngest one, a little boy named Jack after his great-great-great-grandfather, asked, "Did Grandma Catherine really quiet the cows with her singing?" "She did," Emma's grandfather confirmed. "And she quieted so much more than that. She quieted your great-great-great-grandfather's worries and fears. She brought peace to everyone who heard her. And that gift has been passed down through our family, a reminder that we all have the power to bring calm to chaos, to bring beauty to difficult situations." "I want to learn to sing like that," little Jack declared. "Then we will teach you," his grandfather promised. "We will teach you all the songs, and we will tell you all the stories, and you will carry them forward to your own children someday." And so the legacy continued, generation after generation, the story of Jack and Catherine Morrison living on in the hearts and voices of their descendants. The ranch remained in the family, adapted for new times but still holding true to the values that had been established over a century before: hard work, integrity, love of family, and the belief that music had the power to soothe and heal. The cottonwood tree where Jack first heard Catherine sing still stood, now ancient and gnarled but still alive, still providing shade to anyone who sought it. It became a pilgrimage site for Morrison family members, a place to visit when they needed to feel connected to their roots, to remember where they came from. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind was just right, people claimed they could still hear singing coming from that spot, a woman's voice, clear and pure, singing the cattle to sleep and quieting the storms that raged in human hearts. Whether it was truly Catherine's ghost or simply the wind playing tricks or the power of suggestion, no one could say for certain, but it did not really matter. The truth of the story did not lie in whether the voice was real or imagined. It lay in the love that had inspired it, the love between a rancher and a singer, a love that had started with a desperate idea and a willing heart and had grown into something that transcended time itself. Jack and Catherine Morrison had built more than a ranch. They had built a love story that would be told for generations, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single act of faith, a willingness to take a chance on something that seems impossible. They had shown that love could bridge any distance, overcome any obstacle, and create something lasting and beautiful. Their story became a part of the land itself, woven into the fabric of Sweetwater and the surrounding territory. The Morrison Ranch stood as a monument to their vision and their partnership. The church, where they were married, still held services every Sunday, and sometimes the choir would sing the songs Catherine had taught them over a century ago. The boarding house where Catherine had lived was now a museum, with a room dedicated to her life and her music. But the truest monument to Jack and Catherine was not made of wood or stone. It was the family they had created, the love they had nurtured, the values they had instilled. It was in the way their descendants treated each other and the world around them, with kindness and integrity, and an understanding that we all have gifts to share if we are brave enough to use them. The story of the cowboy and the singer, of restless cattle and a voice that could quiet thunderstorms, became one of those rare things, a legend that was also completely true. It reminded people that miracles could happen in the most ordinary places, that love could be found when you least expected it, and that sometimes the solution to your problems came in a form you never could have imagined. Jack Morrison had thought his cattle would never settle, that he would lose everything his father had worked for. But he had been willing to try one more thing, no matter how crazy it seemed. Catherine Wellesley had thought she would never escape the constraints of her old life, that she would always be running. But she had been willing to take a chance on a stranger with kind eyes and a desperate need. Together, they had created something magical. Not through grand gestures or dramatic actions, but through simple, everyday love. Through showing up for each other day after day. Through building a life together, brick by brick, choice by choice. Through believing in each other even when things were difficult. And in the end, that was the real lesson of their story. Love was not about perfection or ease. It was about choosing each other again and again. It was about finding peace in each other's presence, about being each other's calm in the storm. It was about building something together that was stronger than anything either person could have built alone. Jack had been right that night when he first heard Catherine sing. Her voice could quiet a thunderstorm. But more than that, her love had quieted his restless heart, had given him peace and purpose and joy beyond measure. And his love had done the same for her, giving her a home and a family and a place where her gifts were not just accepted but celebrated. They had lived a good life, a full life, a life worth celebrating and remembering. And though they were gone, their love lived on in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the ranch they had built, in the community they had served, in the songs that were still sung and the stories that were still told. On the Morrison Ranch, as the sun set over the prairie and the cattle settled down for the night, you could still feel their presence. In the gentle breeze that rustled through the grass, in the peace that seemed to permeate the land. In the way families gathered and sang together, keeping alive the traditions that Jack and Catherine had established so many years ago. And if you listened carefully on those quiet evenings when the world seemed to pause and hold its breath, you might hear it. A voice, clear and beautiful, singing a lullaby to restless souls. Catherine's voice, Jack's heart, forever intertwined, forever at peace, forever home. Their love story had begun with cattle that would not sleep, and a woman who could sing them to rest. It had grown into something much larger and more meaningful than either of them could have imagined. It had become a testament to the power of love, the importance of taking chances, and the truth that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the most unexpected sources. Jack and Catherine Morrison had lived and loved and built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. They had shown generations of their family what it meant to be true partners, to support and cherish each other through all of life's challenges and joys. They had proven that love, real love, was not just a feeling but a choice, made every day in big ways and small. And somewhere, in that place beyond this world where spirits go when their earthly work is done, Jack and Catherine were together still, their love undiminished by death, their partnership eternal. Jack listening as Catherine sang, her voice still capable of quieting any storm, still bringing peace to his restless heart. Together forever, as they had always been meant to be, their love story complete and perfect and enduring. The end came full circle back to where it had all begun. With a voice that could quiet a thunderstorm, with cattle finally at peace, with a cowboy who had found far more than he ever knew he was searching for, and with a love that had transformed two individual lives into one beautiful, shared journey. The Morrison Ranch stood as proof that sometimes desperation leads to inspiration, that faith can move mountains, and that a simple song sung with love has the power to change everything.